Welcome to Flight Levels. Today we're doing a slightly different style of video. As you can see, we're not in my usual studio. We're off in a different setting here. And today we're going to talk about some difficult moments I've had as a pilot and a flight instructor, because unfortunately it's not always easy. So I wanted to share some personal moments I've had over the years, and then I'd like to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on my experiences, and what are some difficult moments you guys have had? So we're going to start with one really early in my flight instructor career, and it was the morning of my initial CFI check ride. So at the time I was in my undergrad at Florida Tech, and at the time it was it's still a Part 141 school. And usually at a Part 141 school, you have on-staff examiners that can provide check rides and issue certificates on behalf of the local FSDO. Well, unfortunately, that year there had been, the FSDO had their microscope out for our school, and they had taken away the privileges of in-house initial flight instructor check rides. So they said, all right, guys, the FSDO is going to do all of the initial check rides for a while. So, of course, scheduling it with the FSDO is a little bit more difficult. So when my instructor felt I was ready for the check ride, we put my name in the list, and, they told me, be ready. We don't know exactly when it's going to be, but it's going to be soon. And so I was like, fair enough. So, every day I would study for a little bit, but no big deal. And then one morning, I got a phone call at 5 a.m. and it was my flight instructor. And he's like, Joe, sorry to wake you up, but I am so sorry. I forgot today is the day of your check ride. Are you ready? What? And, the tough situation was like, you don't want to reschedule these things. So had I known I had the check ride that day, I of course would have studied for several hours the night before, but that's not what happened. So I told my instructor, hey, no problem. You know what? I'm going to get up. I'm going to study for a little bit, get some breakfast, and I'll be there, and we'll make this happen. And man, that was a tough phone call. I was not ready for that. So luckily, the training I had received at Florida Tech was outstanding. And even though I didn't know it was my check ride that day, I went ahead and I did pass. And luckily the FSDO examiner was impressed enough that he said it was okay if I did my flight portion of the check ride with one of the in-house instructors. So that was a nice pat on the back that I had done well enough for them to authorize that. So that was a great start to being a flight instructor, but I'm happy to say I passed the first time. So the next time I had something difficult, so this was a couple years ago. I was flight instructing in California, and I was flight instructing a young man who was in high school, and unfortunately, I started having, the more context to the story is I was teaching in my airplane that you may have seen in the channel, and I was starting to have some pretty major maintenance issues with the plane, and it was down for quite a while. So for this student, as well as for several of my other students, I advised them, like, look, I love you guys, I like teaching you, but it's not fair to you to stick with me not knowing when my plane's going to be back. So I, found flight instructors and airplanes for all of my students to go to. And so this one student of mine, he went and started training with another instructor, and he ultimately ended up buying his own airplane to train in, which was great. And I've had a lot of students do that, and that works out well for most people. But then when it came time for him to do his check ride, he called me up and was like, Joe, like, how do you schedule a DPE? I'm like, yeah, man, it sucks. It is a thing. And we talked about, you know, calling around, and I suggested some of the DPs I had luck with. And so then a couple days later, this student called back. He's like, "Hey, Joe, you know, I found a DPE in Idaho. What do you think about that?" And I'm like, "What?" Because we were, you know, just outside of San Francisco. I'm like, "Well, walk me through. How is Idaho working?" He's like, "Oh yeah, my instructor is going to sign me off to do a solo flight to Idaho to go be this DPE, and I'll do my private pilot Checkride there." I was like, "Okay, like if your instructor is good with that, like, you know, technically that's legal, and, you know, I hope that works out for you." So a couple days later, I've been thinking about this, and it didn't sit right with me. And because at least in my experience, I didn't start flying cross countries that long until much later and much more experience in my pilot career. And in my memory of my experience exploring that kind of flying, like, it's a thing. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happens. So I decided to call this young man's father and express my feelings, because I'm all about, like, hey, if something doesn't feel right, you need to speak up and speak your mind. And it was a tough balance, because he wasn't my student anymore. He had this other instructor. And I really do not like stepping on other instructors' toes, and I expect the same in return. I don't want them to step on mine. But this is a situation that I felt I needed to speak up. So I called up his father and explained, like, "Hey, look, you know, I respect your instructor, but this seems a bit much. Like, I understand he wants to get his Checkride done. I understand this examiner in Idaho has availability, but, like, man, I don't think he should do it." And I was very happy that his father listened to me, and, you know, he, you know, didn't shoot me down. There was no yelling or anything. And he's like, "Well, you know, let me think about it and talk with his instructor about it." And it's like, that's all I can ask. And ultimately, he decided to follow through with this plan, and luckily he did safely make the solo trip up there, and luckily he did pass, and then he flew back and everything was fine. But man, that was hard speaking up, and I just knew if anything went wrong on that flight and I hadn't spoken up, like, that, I would have really had a hard time with that. So I'm glad I at least spoke up. I'm happy that he passed and everything went well. But that was that was really hard for me. It's hard speaking up sometimes. Okay, so then next situation that I had trouble with. This was a few years before this, where I was flight instructing in Colorado. And this is when I was slowly transitioning to instructing with a flying club to instructing in my own airplane. And one of the clients that I was working with, I had helped him earn his private pilot certificate in a club aircraft. And since I now had my own airplane, I kind of put my foot down and said, "Hey, I'm exclusively teaching in my airplane." And this student wanted to keep training with me. So we made a deal where he would fly the club airplane to the airport that I was at, and then I would join him in the airplane. We would go do a lesson. He would drop me off, and then he would go back to the airport where the club was located. And, you know, that worked for me, because I just didn't want to drive all the way to this other airport. So on this particular evening, we did a lesson exactly like I described, and he dropped me off at the airport near where I was living, and I went home, and, you know, it seemed fine. And about an hour later, I get a phone call from this student. I'm like, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" He's like, "Well, not so good." I'm like, what's up?" He's like, "I just crashed." I was like, "What? Are you okay?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm okay." But yeah, when he was landing back at the airport where the airplane was based, the winds had picked up, which they do sometimes in Colorado. and he had a hard time landing. He went off the edge of the runway and airplane ended up upside down. Luckily, he was okay. He was strapped in just fine, and the airplane was totaled. But yeah, that was a hard phone call to get. Yeah, luckily he was okay, and nobody else was involved, and I felt very responsible because I had just flown with him, like, but at the same time, like, he's also a private pilot with private pilot privileges. And the moment I stepped out of the airplane, my responsibility did end. And that was a tough balance for me to sort out. But we talked about those circumstances after that incident, and that was tough for both of us. Luckily, that particular student, he did finish his instrument rating with a different instructor, and now he flies jets out of Florida. So he ended up doing just fine. But yeah, that was a tough phone call for me to get. And then we're going to talk about one more instance that was really hard for me. I was instructing in that club in Colorado, and of course one of the things you do as an instructor is you offer flight reviews to folks. And so there was this gentleman who was he was older than most, and usually that's fine. Like, I've flown with plenty of mature men and women, and they do just fine. And this particular gentleman, we got on the plane, or rather we started with the ground, and the ground portion was fine, in a pretty typical flight review. We get in the plane, he flies the plane just great, but he cannot hear worth anything. Pretty much every single radio call that ground and tower gave him, he didn't respond to, and I would have to jump in, and I would give him the benefit of the doubt, like, hey, did you hear that? And like with prompting, he could do it, but if I just simply sat there and let things happen, nothing. So we tried troubleshooting, we tried adjusting volume, we tried all sorts of things that I could come up with, and we did the flight. He could fly just fine, and then even at non-towered airports, same thing. So when we finished the flight, he's like, well, how'd I do? And I'm like, well, like, you're a great pilot. At the same time, like, if you cannot hear things on the radio, like, that's not compatible with being a safe pilot. And, I said, I cannot in good conscience sign you off for your flight review. And, let's talk about things we can do about that. And, I offered, like, hey, look, what kind of flying do you do? And he's like, oh, usually I just, take the club plane and I go to this other airport and get breakfast and come back. And I'm like, look, like, I am happy to come with you anytime you want to do that. I'm trying to find some kind of a solution that doesn't ground this guy. And understandably, he was really upset. Like, he'd probably been flying for the last over 50 years, and who am I to tell him that he can't fly anymore? But I'm exactly the guy that needed to tell him not to fly anymore. That is your job as the flight instructor. Like, when you do a flight review, you identify deficiencies and you offer a path to improve those. And at least at the time, like, I could not find a path forward other than my offering to basically be the pilot in command anytime he wants to fly. And unfortunately, I never heard from him again. And I can sympathize why. And I have no idea if that gentleman threw in the towel, or did he find another flight instructor that did sign him off? I don't know. I just hope that if his performance in hearing on the radio was what it was that day, that he was not signed off. I hope not. But man, that was hard to do. That is not something that at least I was prepared for when I became a flight instructor, is moments like that. So anyways, those are some personal moments of mine that were exceptionally difficult as a flight instructor and as a pilot. And I hope you enjoyed this new format, and we'll see you guys next week.